It's about standards, Chelsea. The voice boomed from the coat check, and every sound in the Harvard Club lobby collapsed into that single frequency. If Marcus's mother shows up looking like she just scrubbed floors, keep her away from the partners. We can't have the cleaning lady chatting up the Supreme Court justices. My fingers went numb around the federal judge credentials in my purse. The marble floor beneath my modest navy heels suddenly felt like ice. And I became aware of every heartbeat in my chest, not racing, but slowing. Each pump, deliberate, predatory. The air tasted like old copper, like blood from a bitten tongue. Preston Hartwell, my son's future father-in-law, the man who thought my dignity was determined by his tax bracket. A frantic floor manager materialized at my elbow, shoving a stark white apron into my hands. "Late again," he hissed, checking his watch. "Kitchen's through the left. Tray service starts in 5 minutes." I looked at the apron, then at Preston, still holding court by the coat check, his silver cufflinks catching the chandelier light as he gestured expansively. His daughter, Chelsea, was nodding along, her expression polished and cold. I tied the apron strings tight. "Right away, sir," I whispered. "My name is Victoria. I'm 54, and I'm the youngest woman ever appointed to the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. This is the story of how I served justice with a champagne tray. In my courtroom, silence is a weapon. You let a defendant talk long enough, comfortable enough, and they'll hang themselves every single time. I decided to apply the same jurisprudence here. I walked through the service entrance and into the ballroom, not as Judge Victoria Nash, but as a ghost in a white apron. The transformation was instantaneous. A psychological phenomenon I'd studied for years. The gray rock method. By making myself uninteresting, flat, subservient, I became invisible. The elite of New York didn't see a person. They saw furniture that served champagne. And because I was furniture, they felt safe. I moved through the crowd, tray balanced on one hand. The air was thick with expensive perfume, and the particular arrogance that comes from never having to check a price tag. The Hartwells had merged Marcus and Chelsea's engagement celebration with Hartwell and Partners' annual firm gala, a strategic choice that allowed them to parade their future son-in-law before clients while writing off the champagne as a business expense. Across the room, I caught my son's eye. Marcus was standing by the champagne tower, looking handsome but anxious in his tuxedo. His eyes went wide when he spotted me. I gave him the look, the same one I give a bailiff when a defendant's about to have an outburst. A microscopic shake of the head, a narrowing of the eyes that says, "Stand down, let this happen." Marcus knew that look. He'd grown up with it. He closed his mouth and stepped back into the shadow of a pillar. Good boy. I circled toward the Hartwell family. Preston was holding court near the orchestra, scotch in hand, gesturing like he owned the room, because in his mind, he did. His daughter Chelsea stood beside him in a dress that cost more than my first car. Silk and diamonds worn like armor, not grace. I watched her snap her fingers at a busboy to take her empty glass. No thank you, no eye contact, no acknowledgement that he existed as a human being. They're so lucky we're even considering this merger. Preston laughed, his voice carrying over the music. Marcus is a bright kid, sure, but let's be honest, he's marrying up, way up. We're basically doing charity work here. I filed it away. Evidence. Discovery phase. I drifted closer, refilling a glass near his elbow. More scotch, sir? Preston didn't look at my face. He waved a dismissive hand like I was a fly. Keep it coming, and try not to spill it on the Italian leather. Of course, sir. I walked away, adrenaline settling into a cold, hard knot behind my ribs. He thought I was serving him drinks. In reality, I was serving him rope, and I intended to let him use as much of it as he wanted. Moving through the service door, I stepped into the corridor. The space was jarring after the ballroom. Industrial dishwasher fluid and burnt coffee replacing perfume and pretension. I leaned against the cold tile wall and looked at my hands. 30 years ago, these hands pushed a mop bucket across the marble floors of Bronx Supreme Court. I worked the night shift, stealing 5 minutes of study time between emptying trash bins, propping my textbooks open on wet floor signs. I learned the law by cleaning up after the people who practiced it. Preston Hartwell looked at a server and saw a failure of ambition. I looked at a server and saw the hunger that builds empires. That's why I didn't tear off the apron in the lobby. Wearing this uniform didn't lower my status. It reminded me of my source code. Marcus didn't know the full ledger. He didn't know that when his father left, vanishing to California with his secretary when Marcus was 7, sending birthday cards that arrived 2 weeks late until they stopped arriving at all. I liquidated my retirement fund to keep us in the good school district. He didn't know his semester abroad cost me 3 years of vacations I never took. I'd been the silent investor in his life, pouring equity into his character, compounding interest on his integrity. The Hartwells were late investors, showing up when the stock was already high, trying to acquire controlling interest in a company they didn't build. I straightened my apron and pushed back through the double doors into the ballroom. The room was louder now, alcohol having stripped away the first layer of social varnish. I found the Hartwells near the floor-to-ceiling windows posing for photos. Chelsea was the center of gravity, flanked by bridesmaids who looked less like friends and more like accessories chosen specifically to not outshine her. A young server named Elena approached the circle holding a silver tray of crab cakes. Her hands trembled slightly. She waited for a break in conversation, polite, deferential. "Or so you'd hope, Miss Hartwell." Chelsea spun around, her face twisting with irritation so fast, so ugly it was almost impressive. "God, no," she recoiled like Elena had offered her a petri dish. "I specifically told the coordinator, no shellfish near the bridal party. Are you trying to kill me, or are you just that stupid?" Elena went pale. "I'm so sorry, I didn't—" "Clearly you don't know much." Chelsea's voice carried that sharp, practiced edge of someone who'd learned cruelty as a first language. "Go away before you ruin my dress." Elena turned to leave, eyes welling up, and in her haste bumped the edge of a high-top table. A single champagne flute wobbled and tipped, splashing a few drops onto the marble floor, nowhere near Chelsea's precious gown. You'd have thought a bomb went off. "Unbelievable," Preston roared, stepping in. He didn't check if the girl was okay. He laughed, a cruel barking sound. "You see this, Marcus? This is why we pay for the VIP package, to avoid the riffraff. Good help is basically extinct these days." Marcus looked sick. He started to step forward, but Chelsea put a hand on his chest, claiming him, silencing him. I stepped forward. Not toward Preston, not toward Chelsea. I knelt down on the cold marble next to Elena. "It's just water and grapes, honey," I whispered, pulling a cloth from my apron. "Wipes right up." Elena's eyes were terrified. "I'm going to get fired." "You won't, I promise." From my knees, the angle was perfect. I could see Chelsea towering above me, sneering, sipping her drink. She thought she was queen of this castle because she was standing, and I was kneeling. She didn't understand the oldest law of power, noblesse oblige. True nobility serves. It protects. It lifts up. The weak, the truly weak, are the ones who need to step on others to feel tall. I looked at her $8,000 dress and saw a cheap costume. I looked at Preston's Italian loafers and saw a man with no soul. I stood up, holding the dirty cloth. Caught Chelsea's eye for a second. Just a second. She looked unsettled. Maybe she saw something in my face that didn't belong on a server. Maybe she saw the judge. "All clean, miss," I said, my voice flat. About time, she turned her back. I walked away, but I wasn't gathering evidence anymore. The trial on her character was over. Verdict. Guilty. Now I was just waiting for the sentencing phase. I traded the crab cakes for a bottle of vintage Dom Perignon and moved across the ballroom toward the corner table. The inner sanctum. The air here was thinner, colder. Partners in black tuxedos stood in a tight cluster, backs turned to the party. They weren't discussing the wedding. They were discussing the kill. The Meridian antitrust merger is a done deal, gentlemen, Preston purred, swirling his scotch. $40 billion, the biggest payout this firm has seen in a decade. I poured champagne into the glass of the man next to him, a senior partner whose face I recognized from the firm website. He looked nervous. I don't know, Preston. The DOJ is breathing down our necks, and the case just got assigned to Judge Nash on the Second Circuit. I've heard she's meticulous. My hand didn't shake. I filled the glass to the perfect rim and waited. Preston laughed, a sound like dry leaves crushed underfoot. Nash. Victoria Nash, please. She's a diversity hire with a bleeding heart. Spent her early career in family court. She cares about feelings, not fiscal quarters. I stepped back into the shadows, clutching the cold bottle against my apron. Exhibit A, underestimation of opposing counsel. But the environmental impact reports, the partner pressed. If Nash sees the toxicity levels in the water table data, she'll block the merger. It's a Clean Water Act violation. Preston took a long, slow sip. She won't see them. The circle went quiet. We're not going to shred them, are we? Someone whispered. We're not amateurs, Preston scoffed. He glanced around the corner, seeing only servers, seeing only furniture, and leaned in closer, his voice dropping, but still carrying in the acoustics of the alcove. We're going to bury them. We dumped the toxicity reports in box 4000 of the Discovery handover, right between cafeteria receipts and parking validation logs. She's a federal judge with a backed-up docket. She doesn't have the time, and she certainly doesn't have the brain power to dig through 2 million pages of Discovery for the one chart that matters. A cold thrill raced down my spine, the sensation I usually only feel when a jury foreman stands to read a verdict. He'd just admitted to spoliation of evidence. He'd just confessed to conspiracy to defraud the court, and he'd done it in front of the very judge he planned to deceive. We steamroll her, Preston concluded, raising his glass. We walk in, use big words, bury the bodies, and walk out with $40 billion to Meridian. The men chorused. I adjusted the towel over my arm. In my head, I wasn't serving drinks anymore. I was drafting a bench warrant. More champagne, gentlemen? I asked, voice invisible. Keep it coming, sweetheart, Preston said, turning his back again. I walked away. He thought he was burying evidence. He didn't realize he was burying himself. But he wasn't done. Drunk on power now. The kind of intoxication that makes men careless. Preston draped an arm around the senior partner's shoulder. And it's not just the firm winning today. Chelsea just secured the summer associate position at the Solicitor General's office, the DC internship. The partner raised an eyebrow. Impressive. That program accepts what? 3 applicants a year, usually reserved for the top 1% of Ivy Leagues. I froze. I knew that program. I sat on the oversight committee. The selection was blind, rigorous, merit-based. Chelsea Hartwell, who I'd just watched abuse a server for a mistake she didn't make, did not have the temperament or transcript for that seat. Preston chuckled, low and oily. Let's just say the selection committee suddenly remembered how much they enjoy the new reading room I funded. They had to make some administrative adjustments. Adjustments? There was some girl. Preston waved his hand dismissively. Elena Vasquez, I think. Nobody from a state school. Perfect grades, law review at Michigan. Apparently a real striver. But she doesn't have the pedigree. We couldn't let a slot like that go to waste on someone who doesn't have the connections to use it. Her application got misplaced. My blood ran cold. I looked toward the service entrance. Elena was sitting on a milk crate during her 5-minute break, a thick book open on her lap. I squinted. Federal Courts and Constitutional Law, 3rd edition. The margins were filled with notes in cheap blue ink. The handwriting of someone who couldn't afford to miss a single detail. The pieces clicked together with the precision of a closing argument. Elena wasn't just a server working her way through school. She was the Elena Vasquez Preston was talking about. A third-year law student whose future had been stolen by a man who treated it like a party favor for his spoiled daughter. The catering job was how she paid rent while waiting for an internship offer that would never come. This wasn't a social slight anymore. This was grand larceny of a human life. I set the champagne bottle down with a deliberate, heavy thud. Discovery phase was over. I had the motive, the method, the confession. I pulled out my phone and opened a contact. Senator Mitchell, my oldest friend from law school, the keynote speaker currently in the green room preparing his remarks for the firm's annual awards presentation. I typed 2 sentences. Code blue in the ballroom. I need a witness. I hit send. The kitchen doors swung open with a heavy thud. Senator William Mitchell stood in the frame, flanked by 2 Secret Service agents. His face was on every news channel in the country. Preston's face lit up. He smoothed his jacket, stepped forward with his hand extended. Mitchell walked right past him, didn't even blink. He walked straight to the service station where I was standing, holding a dirty rag. Victoria, his voice boomed in the sudden quiet. Judge Nash, why on earth are you wearing an apron? The silence that followed was absolute, the kind of vacuum that happens when a bomb detonates, but the sound hasn't caught up yet. Preston's hand was still extended, grasping nothing. He looked at the senator, then at me, the cleaning lady, then back at the senator. His face went from flush to ashen in 3 seconds flat. Judge, Chelsea whispered, her champagne glass tilting dangerously. I reached behind my back and untied the apron, pulled the white fabric over my head, folded it neatly, slowly, and placed it on the tray next to the empty glasses. I smoothed the lapels of my navy suit. Actually, Miss Hartwell, I said, my voice projecting without raising a decibel. I'm the presiding judge on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, the same court currently reviewing your father's $40 billion merger. Preston made a choking sound. Judge Nash, we had no idea. Clearly a misunderstanding. We were just joking, about joking. I stepped into his personal space. He shrank back. Was it a joke when you admitted to conspiracy to violate the Clean Water Act? Was it a joke when you detailed your plan to bury toxicity reports in Box 4000 of Discovery? The blood left his lips completely. That's privileged conversation. Not when you shouted at a waiter in a crowded room, Mr. Hartwell. My voice could have frozen champagne. There's no attorney-client privilege in the catering line. You admitted to spoliation of evidence in front of a federal judge and a United States senator. I nodded at Mitchell, who crossed his arms and glared. I can explain. You will, I promised, at your disbarment hearing. I turned to Chelsea. She looked small now. The armor of her expensive dress dissolved. She looked like exactly what she was, a child playing dress up in stolen clothes. As for the Solicitor General's internship, I continued, watching her flinch, I sit on that oversight committee. We take academic integrity seriously. I'll be personally pulling your file tomorrow morning. I'm very interested to see how an application got misplaced to make room for you. Mother, do something. Chelsea grabbed her mother's arm. Her mother, a thin woman in pearls who had spent the evening floating silently in her husband's shadow, was staring at the floor, wishing she could dissolve into the carpet. She said nothing. She would file for divorce 3 months later, citing irreconcilable differences, and move to her sister's house in Connecticut. Marcus, I turned to my son. He stepped out from the shadows, and he didn't look scared anymore. He looked relieved. He looked at Chelsea, then at me. Then he walked over and stood by my side. Ready to go, Mom? One last thing. I turned back to Preston, now trembling visibly. You were right about one thing, Mr. Hartwell. You really should be careful who you talk to. I smiled. Cold. Small. Precise. You never know when the cleaning lady might hold the gavel. I turned on my heel and walked toward the exit, Marcus beside me. The silence held until the heavy doors swung shut behind us. I didn't stay for the cake. We stepped out of the Harvard Club and into the November night. I hailed a cab while Marcus stood beside me, pulling Chelsea's engagement ring from his pocket and staring at it. I should have seen it sooner, he said quietly. You saw it when it mattered. He nodded, then handed me the ring. Can you return this? I don't want to see her again. Done. By the time the cab pulled away from the curb, I was already drafting an affidavit on my phone, documenting every word I'd witnessed. Senator Mitchell would provide his own sworn statement by morning. The fallout was swift. It wasn't a scandal. It was an implosion. 18 months later, the headlines were still running. Meridian merger blocked. Hartwell and partners under federal investigation. DOJ secures guilty plea in evidence tampering case. Preston Hartwell didn't just lose the case. He lost the firm when the Bar Association received our sworn affidavit detailing his confession, corroborated by a U.S. senator. His license to practice law was suspended pending investigation. 8 months later, the suspension became permanent. The firm's partners voted to dissolve rather than face the ongoing federal scrutiny. And by the following spring, the Hartwell name had been stripped from the letterhead entirely. Chelsea's situation was more complicated. The Oversight Committee's investigation revealed that she had known about her father's interference with Elena's application and had actively participated by drafting the memo that justified the administrative adjustment. She was expelled from her law school's honors program and faced academic fraud charges that resulted in a plea agreement, 200 hours of community service, and a permanent notation on her bar application that would follow her for the rest of her career. But the real justice wasn't in the destruction of the old guard. It was in the reallocation of assets. I sat in my chambers, morning sun hitting the mahogany desk. Marcus sat across from me, looking lighter than he had in years. He'd walked away from Chelsea that night without looking back, returned the ring through my office the next morning, and spent the following year rebuilding his sense of self. He was dating someone new now, a pediatric nurse he'd met volunteering at a free clinic, someone who'd never heard of the Hartwell name and didn't care about his last name either. Chelsea called me yesterday, Marcus said, stirring his coffee. She's working at a legal aid office in Brooklyn, part of her community service agreement. She said her feet hurt from taking the subway. I smiled, signing a document. Good. Discomfort is an excellent teacher. Maybe she'll finally learn that respect isn't an inheritance, and Elena, the internship. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a fresh file. That was the easiest ruling I've ever made. I'd tracked down Elena 2 weeks after the party. I'd called the catering company, explained I was following up on a personnel matter, and obtained her contact information. Found her in the law library at Michigan, buried in those same case books. When I handed her the acceptance letter, the one Chelsea had tried to steal, she didn't scream. She didn't jump. She just cried, silent and shaking, the way people do when they've been invisible for so long. They forget what it feels like to be seen. She finished her clerkship last month, I told Marcus. The Solicitor General's office offered her a permanent position. She didn't need a favor. She just needed a fair trial. I walked to the window and looked out over the city. The skyline was full of glass and steel towers, monuments to power and money. But down on the streets, the real city was moving. Janitors, servers, bus drivers, the invisible army that keeps the world turning. I thought about that apron folded neatly in my closet at home, right next to my judicial robes, different uniforms, same master truth. Preston Hartwell thought power was about who you could command. He forgot that true power is about who you can protect. I turned back to my son, my gavel resting heavy and silent on the desk. Justice is blind, I said softly. But she's not deaf, and she hears everything. If you believe that character is revealed when no one's watching, share this story and tell me in the comments. What would you have done in Victoria's shoes? Before you go, here's a quick bonus for sticking around. If you love learning and growing like I do, you need to try audiobooks. I've got an exclusive deal with Audible. Your first month is completely free. That's access to over 500,000 titles, zero cost to you. All the details are waiting in the description. Don't miss this one.